Imagine signing a contract that will change your life forever. Camilla never imagined that by agreeing to be a surrogate for a mysterious billionaire, she'd get caught up in a web of secrets, emotions, and an unexpected love. But what she didn't know was that the man already knew her and was hiding something that could change everything. Camilla stared at the contract on the table, a mix of anxiety and fear washing over her. The cold words printed on the paper defined her life for the next few months. Terms and conditions for surrogacy. It was an extensive document, full of legal clauses and unchangeable rules. The offered amount was enormous, enough to clear her debts and give her life a new direction. But what troubled her wasn't the money. It was the weight of the decision she was about to make. She took a deep breath. This opportunity seemed like a gift from destiny. After years of struggling to survive, living off odd jobs and facing difficulties to pay her bills, she now had a chance to change everything. But at what cost? Carrying a child that wasn't hers required more than just her body. It demanded her emotional stability, her mental strength, and a commitment she couldn't break. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" asked Dr. Almeida, the lawyer responsible for the agreement. He looked at her with a professional air, but there was something in his gaze that hinted at a trace of curiosity. Camilla nodded. Her voice came out firm, although her heart hammered against her chest. "Yes, I'm ready." The lawyer slid a silver pen across the table. Camilla grabbed it with trembling fingers, and before signing, she asked the question that had been haunting her from the start. "The baby's father, why isn't he here?" Dr. Almeida maintained a neutral expression, but his response was straightforward. "He prefers to remain anonymous. You don't need to worry about that. Everything has been arranged for you to have the best experience possible." Camilla didn't know why, but this answer bothered her. How could a man want an heir so badly, yet remain so distant? Still, she had no choice. With one last sigh, she signed her name at the bottom of the page. She had just sealed her fate. The following days were a mix of anxiety and hope. Camilla began the medical procedures, and the fertilization process was successfully completed. The wait for the pregnancy confirmation was agonizing. Each passing day seemed to drag on in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Until finally, the CHIU test came back positive. She was pregnant. The impact of the news was overwhelming. Camilla felt a mix of relief and fear. Though she knew the child wasn't hers, there was something different. An inexplicable connection started to form inside her. But she had to stay focused. This was a deal, a contract, nothing more. However, something started to catch her attention. Gifts began to arrive at her home. At first, they were simple things. A bouquet of flowers with no sender, a box of fine chocolates. Then, the gifts became more specific. A box of expensive vitamin supplements came with an enigmatic note. "Take good care of our little treasure." Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. Who was sending this? Was it the baby's father? If he didn't want involvement, why did it seem like he was lurking in the shadows? Weeks passed, and the gifts kept coming. A comfortable maternity dress, a special pillow to improve her sleep, a book on motherhood, always accompanied by short, handwritten notes with no signature. Camilla tried to ignore the unease she felt, but it was impossible. There was something about this contract that she didn't fully understand. Something that seemed much bigger than just a surrogacy agreement. One day, while having coffee at a nearby cafe to the clinic where she was getting her exams, she felt a gaze on her. It was a strange sensation, as though she were being watched. She glanced around discreetly but saw no one suspicious. Still, the chill didn't go away. When she left the cafe, she spotted a black car parked across the street. The tinted windows prevented her from seeing who was inside. The car didn't seem familiar, but something inside her told her this wasn't a coincidence. Her heart raced. That contract was becoming more mysterious than she had imagined, and Camilla was sure the truth was closer than ever. She just needed to find out who was behind it all. Days passed, and Camilla tried to focus solely on her routine. But it was impossible to ignore the feeling that something was off. The contract said the baby's father would remain anonymous, with no emotional involvement. So why did she feel watched? Who was sending those gifts? Who was writing those mysterious notes? That morning, Camilla was walking through a park near her house. The fresh air of the morning felt good, and being in nature helped relieve some of the tension she felt. But her peace was interrupted when, as she passed by a bench, she saw something that made her heart race. A black envelope with her name written by hand. She looked around, but there was no one close enough to have left it there. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a small card with a short message. "I'm closer than you think. Take care." A chill ran down her spine. Who had left that there? And what did it mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or just another psychological game from the mysterious man who had hired her? Camilla felt panic rise inside her, but she took a deep breath. She couldn't let fear take over. She needed to act rationally. She decided it was time to confront the lawyer. She wanted answers, and she wouldn't settle for any more evasions. Translation. In Dr. Almeida's office, Camilla struggled to remain calm. The lawyer seemed too composed, as if he had been expecting her visit. "You promised me he'd stay away," she said, placing the envelope on the table. "But he's here. He's watching me. Is this part of the contract?" Dr. Almeida studied the envelope without showing any surprise. Then he looked up at her. "I'm not aware of this, Camilla. Mr. Vasquez made it clear that he would keep his distance." The name made her stomach churn. For the first time, she had a solid piece of the puzzle. Vasquez. Now she knew his name. "So, he has a name," she murmured. "And where is he? Why won't he talk to me directly?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment before replying. "He has his reasons, but I can assure you he doesn't want to scare you." Camilla laughed, without humor. "Leaving cryptic notes and following me doesn't sound very reassuring. Tell him that if he wants this baby, he needs to stop playing games. I've kept my end of the contract, and I expect him to do the same." She stood up and left the office without waiting for a response. But deep down, she knew things were far from being resolved. Something told her that man didn't plan on staying in the shadows for much longer. And she was right. That night, while trying to sleep, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Her heart raced. She hesitated before answering, but something inside her told her she needed to hear it. "Hello?" For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then, a deep, captivating voice with a hint of darkness echoed. "Good evening, Camilla." She held her breath. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, the response came, heavy with mystery. "The man who entrusted you with the most important thing in his life." Camilla's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "Why are you following me?" she whispered. "I'm not following you, just making sure you're safe." The voice was calm, almost protective. But it didn't reassure her. On the contrary, it only made everything more confusing. "If you want me to be okay, then leave me alone." On the other end, a sigh. "That's not possible, Camilla. You're carrying my heir." She closed her eyes, trying to control the flood of emotions. "I'm nothing but a contract to you. So why do you seem so involved?" Silence. Then he answered quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to her. "Maybe because you're more than you think." The call ended before she could reply. Camilla stared at her phone screen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Something was happening, something that went beyond the contract, and she was about to uncover the truth. Camilla spent the night wide awake, clutching her phone tightly, waiting for another call that never came. His voice still echoed in her mind, laden with mystery and something else, something she couldn't decipher. The man who hired her had finally revealed himself, but without showing his face, without giving her any explanation. He just left an enigmatic phrase hanging in the air. Maybe because you're more than you think. More than I think? What? Did he mean by that? The next morning, Camilla decided she couldn't live in uncertainty anymore. If this man was as involved as he claimed, she needed to look him in the eyes. She needed to understand his true intention. Determined, she grabbed the phone and dialed the number that had called her the night before. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited. 1, 2, 3 rings. No answer. She was about to hang up when a deep voice answered. Camilla. She held her breath. It was him. Who are you really? She asked without hesitation. I don't want any more notes, gifts, or late-night calls. If you really care about this child, then find me and say it to my face. Silence. For a moment, she thought he might hang up. But then the response came. Tonight, La Riviera restaurant, 7 o'clock. I'll be waiting. That morning, Camilla was walking through a park near her house. The fresh air of the morning felt good, and being in nature helped relieve some of the tension she felt. But her peace was interrupted when, as she passed by a bench, she saw something that made her heart race. A black envelope with her name written by hand. She looked around, but there was no one close enough to have left it there. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a small card with a short message. I'm closer than you think. Take care. A chill ran down her spine. Who had left that there? And what did it mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or just another psychological game from the mysterious man who had hired her? Camilla felt panic rise inside her, but she took a deep breath. She couldn't let fear take over. She needed to act rationally. She decided it was time to confront the lawyer. She wanted answers, and she wouldn't settle for any more evasions. Translation. In Dr. Almeida's office, Camilla struggled to remain calm. The lawyer seemed too composed, as if he had been expecting her visit. You promised me he'd stay away, she said, placing the envelope on the table. But he's here. He's watching me. Is this part of the contract? Dr. Almeida studied the envelope without showing any surprise. Then he looked up at her. I'm not aware of this, Camilla. Mr. Vasquez made it clear that he would keep his distance. The name made her stomach churn. For the first time, she had a solid piece of the puzzle. Vasquez. Now she knew his name. So, he has a name, she murmured. And where is he? Why won't he talk to me directly? The lawyer hesitated for a moment before replying. He has his reasons, but I can assure you he doesn't want to scare you. Camilla laughed, without humor. Leaving cryptic notes and following me doesn't sound very reassuring. Tell him that if he wants this baby, he needs to stop playing games. I've kept my end of the contract, and I expect him to do the same. She stood up and left the office without waiting for a response. But deep down, she knew things were far from being resolved. Something told her that man didn't plan on staying in the shadows for much longer. And she was right. That night, while trying to sleep, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Her heart raced. She hesitated before answering, but something inside her told her she needed to hear it. Hello? For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then, a deep, captivating voice with a hint of darkness echoed. Good evening, Camilla. She held her breath. Who are you? A pause. Then, the response came, heavy with mystery. The man who entrusted you with the most important thing in his life. Camilla's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Why are you following me? She whispered. I'm not following you, just making sure you're safe. The voice was calm, almost protective. But it didn't reassure her. On the contrary, it only made everything more confusing. If you want me to be okay, then leave me alone. On the other end, a sigh. That's not possible, Camilla. You're carrying my heir. She closed her eyes, trying to control the flood of emotions. I'm nothing but a contract to you. So why do you seem so involved? Silence. Then he answered quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to her. Maybe because you're more than you think. The call ended before she could reply. Camilla stared at her phone screen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Something was happening, something that went beyond the contract, and she was about to uncover the truth. Camilla spent the night wide awake, clutching her phone tightly, waiting for another call that never came. His voice still echoed in her mind, laden with mystery and something else, something she couldn't decipher. The man who hired her had finally revealed himself, but without showing his face, without giving her any explanation. He just left an enigmatic phrase hanging in the air. Maybe because you're more than you think. More than I think? What did he mean by that? The next morning, Camilla decided she couldn't live in uncertainty anymore. If this man was as involved as he claimed, she needed to look him in the eyes. She needed to understand his true intention. Determined, she grabbed the phone and dialed the number that had called her the night before. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited. 1, 2, 3 rings. No answer. She was about to hang up when a deep voice answered. Camilla. She held her breath. It was him. Who are you really? She asked without hesitation. I don't want any more notes, gifts, or late-night calls. If you really care about this child, then find me and say it to my face. Silence. For a moment, she thought he might hang up. But then the response came. Tonight, La Riviera restaurant, 7 o'clock. I'll be waiting. Because I didn't know how you'd react. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me, if you'd even care. And more than that, I didn't want this child to just be the product of a cold contract. I wanted to make sure you were safe. That you had everything you needed. He looked her in the eyes. But I was also scared you'd push me away, that you'd see this arrangement as nothing more than a business deal with no deeper meaning. Camilla looked away. She wanted to deny it, to say it was ridiculous, that things should have been handled differently. But deep down, something inside her warmed at his words. The idea that Gabriel had never forgotten her, that their past connection still existed, touched her more than she was willing to admit. You didn't have to hide it, she murmured. I would have understood. Gabriel gave a small, almost sad smile. I know that now. But I also know that this changes everything. And the question I need to ask is, how do you feel about all this? Camilla swallowed hard. How did she feel? It was a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to run, to escape all this confusion. But another part felt something different. Something beyond shock, something rooted in an old memory, in a connection that apparently had never truly been broken. I need time, she said finally. This is a lot to take in all at once. Gabriel nodded, giving her space. I understand. But just know that I'm here, for you, for this child, for whatever you need. Camilla felt the weight of those words. For the first time, she realized that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. But there was still so much to uncover, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. Camilla spent the next few days trying to process everything she had learned. Gabriel Vasquez wasn't just a mysterious billionaire who had hired her as a surrogate. He was someone from her past, a boy she had helped, never imagining their paths would cross again. The weight of that revelation still left her speechless, and with every new message from Gabriel, the confusion inside her only grew. She didn't know how to handle it. The initial contract was clear: carry the child, then move on with her life. But now, with every glance, every conversation, the bond between them seemed to deepen. And the worst part was admitting that, deep down, she liked it. That afternoon, after leaving her routine doctor's appointment, she found Gabriel waiting for her outside the clinic. He was dressed in a dark suit, as impeccable as ever, but his gaze was softer, less intimidating than the first time they met. "How was the appointment?" he asked, straight to the point. Camilla hesitated before answering. "All good. The baby is healthy." He nodded, looking relieved, but there was something else in his expression, something he was holding back. "I need you to come with me," he said suddenly. Camilla frowned. "To where?" "Just come. I promise you won't regret it." Camilla hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to maintain the safe distance that still existed between them. But deep down, curiosity and the need to understand this man better made her accept. They got into Gabriel's car together, and during the ride, he remained silent. Camilla watched the city through the window, wondering where he was taking her. Finally, they stopped in front of a large glass building, modern and sophisticated. "What is this?" she asked as she stepped out of the car. Gabriel approached, extending his hand for her to follow him. "You'll see." They entered, and as soon as they passed the reception area, Camilla realized they were in a luxuriously equipped pediatric wing. The place was cozy, decorated with soft colors and toys, but what truly caught her attention were the children. Small patients in wheelchairs, some in hospital beds, others simply playing while waiting for their appointments. The environment, despite carrying an underlying sadness, was welcoming. "What is this place?" she asked, touched by the scene before her. "This is a foundation I created years ago," Gabriel explained. "A private children's hospital, entirely funded by me. Here, underprivileged children receive top-tier treatment without having to pay a cent." Camilla was surprised. She would never have imagined this about him. She had always seen him as a cold, distant man, driven only by business. But now, she saw another side of Gabriel Vasquez, a side he hid from the world. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered, feeling a lump in her throat. Gabriel met her gaze, his eyes intense. "Because I want you to know who I really am. I want you to see that this money, this power that people say I have, all of it only matters if it can be used for something greater. And in some way, you are part of this, Camilla. You always have been." She felt her heart race. His words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that they were still just strangers bound by a contract, something inside her said otherwise, and that certainty scared her more than anything else. In the following days, Camilla couldn't get the visit to the children's hospital out of her mind. Seeing Gabriel in a new light made her question everything she thought she knew about him. The cold and calculating man who had hired her now seemed like someone genuinely concerned for others, someone who carried scars from the past but still tried to make a difference. This new perspective left her increasingly confused. To make things more complicated, he seemed determined to get closer. He constantly sent messages asking if she needed anything, showed up at her medical appointments, and insisted on accompanying her on short walks to help her relax. What had once been a simple contract was now becoming a connection more complex than either of them was prepared to handle. On one of those walks, Gabriel took her to a quiet park far from the city's hustle and bustle. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues, when he stopped and looked directly at her. "You've been avoiding talking to me about what you found out," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. Camilla sighed, knowing there was no point in running from the conversation. "Because I don't know how to deal with it," she admitted. "I spent years trying to forget my past, to move forward, and now you show up, bringing it all back, changing everything." Gabriel crossed his arms, studying her intently. "And is that a bad thing?" She was silent for a few moments, trying to organize her thoughts. "I don't know," she finally replied. "But I know it wasn't supposed to be like this. This contract was supposed to be simple. I would have the baby, you would take responsibility, and I would move on with my life. But now," she hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. "Now I don't know what to think anymore." Gabriel stepped closer, his expression softer than ever. "I didn't expect this either," he confessed. "But I'm starting to believe that some things happen for a reason. And you've always been part of my life, even without knowing it. I can't ignore that." Camilla's heart pounded. Everything about him was intense, overwhelming. And for the first time, she felt that maybe she was allowing herself to be pulled into this whirlwind of emotions. "Gabriel, she began, but was interrupted by the ringing of his phone. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I have to take this," he said, stepping away slightly. Camilla watched as he spoke on the phone, his expression gradually changing. Something was wrong. When he hung up, his face was filled with concern. "What happened?" she asked, alarmed. Gabriel took a deep breath before answering. "Problems at the company, something that could put everything at risk." His gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, Camilla felt like she was about to lose the little stability they had built, and the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger made her shudder. Gabriel left in a hurry, leaving Camilla in the park, uncertain about what to think. From the beginning, she had tried to keep a barrier between them, reminding herself that this was just a contract. But the more she got to know Gabriel, the harder it was to ignore the man behind, the magnate. Days passed without any news from him. The silence bothered her more than she expected. She tried to focus on her pregnancy, on medical appointments, and on her own life, but there was a constant restlessness inside her. Then one morning, she received an unexpected call. "Camilla?" Gabriel's voice sounded exhausted on the other end of the line. "Gabriel? What's going on? You disappeared." There was a pause before he replied. "I need you to come to my company. Now." The urgency in his tone made her leave the house without hesitation. When she arrived at the towering Vasquez Corporation building, she immediately noticed the tension in the air. Employees walked hurriedly. Murmurs of concern filled the hallways. Something big was happening. As she entered Gabriel's office, she found him standing, staring out at the city through the massive glass windows. He looked exhausted, but his gaze remained firm, full of determination. "What's happening?" she asked, trying to understand why she had been called. Gabriel turned slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I'm about to lose everything," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "One of my partners is trying to bring me down. He manipulated information, convinced the board that my leadership puts the company at risk. And now, there's a vote. Scheduled for tomorrow, they will decide whether I remain in charge or not." Camilla felt a chill down her spine. "This is serious." "It's more than serious." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. "I've spent my entire life building this, and now, because of one misplaced trust, I could lose it all." She hesitated before stepping closer. "What can I do?" Gabriel looked at her for a moment, as if considering something. "I need you by my side tomorrow," he finally said. "I know this might sound strange, but your presence means more than you realize. You represent something to me and to them. They know we're connected by this contract, but they don't know who you really are. I want them to see that I'm more than cold business deals and numbers. I want them to see that I have something real to fight for." Camilla's heart raced. She was about to step into a game that wasn't hers. But as she looked into Gabriel's eyes, she realized that, in a way, she was already involved. And at that moment, she understood that maybe she wanted to be. The next morning, Camilla woke up with a weight on her chest. Gabriel's request still echoed in her mind. She had never been involved in the business world, much less in a battle as intense as this one. But the way he asked, the vulnerability he rarely showed, made her feel that she needed to be there. She dressed carefully, choosing something elegant but not flashy. If she was going to face a board full of powerful executives, she had to look the part. When she arrived at Vasquez Corporation, the atmosphere was even heavier than the day before. The main hallway was filled with journalists and photographers trying to capture any information about Gabriel's possible removal. Seeing her, a security guard escorted her to the upper floor, where she found Gabriel sitting in a leather chair, his eyes fixed on documents in front of him. He looked up as soon as she entered. "You came," he said, and for the first time there was a hint of relief in his voice. "I said I would," she replied, stepping closer. Gabriel stood up and adjusted his suit, taking a deep breath. "The board is gathered. They want to hear me, but I know many have already made up their minds before even stepping into the room. My partner, Navarro, has too much influence over them. My only chance is to prove that I'm not the cold businessman he's trying to portray. And that's where you come in." Camilla frowned. "What exactly do you want me to do?" He stepped closer, holding her hands firmly. "Just be yourself. Show them that I'm not driven solely by numbers, that I have something real in my life. Navarro wants them to believe that I'm reckless, incapable of making rational decisions. But if they see that I'm capable of building something beyond business, maybe they'll change their minds." Camilla's heart pounded. Was she really about to be used as proof of Gabriel's character? And more importantly, did this really mean something to him? Or was it just a game to keep his empire intact? Before she could reflect too much, the conference room doors opened. The atmosphere was formal, tense. Men and women in suits sat around a long glass table, their expressions neutral but laden with judgment. Navarro, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, smirked condescendingly as Gabriel entered. "Glad you made it, Vasquez," he said. "We're all eager to hear what you have to say before we make our decision." Gabriel kept his composure and sat at the head of the table. Camilla positioned herself beside him, feeling the curious gazes on her. "Before we begin," Gabriel said firmly, "I'd like to introduce someone. This is Camilla." Some board members exchanged glances. Navarro raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly does this young woman have to do with our decision today?" Gabriel's gaze remained steady. "Everything. Because she represents something you insist on ignoring. For years, I built this company with an iron hand, yes, but also with purpose. The same purpose that led me to create the Children's Foundation and that brought me here today. Camilla is not just someone who entered my life by chance. She is proof that there are things beyond business, beyond power. And that is precisely why I am still the best leader for this company." Silence filled the room. Camilla felt the intensity of his words and realized that, for the first time, she was seeing Gabriel fight not just for his company, but for something much bigger. And in that instant, she understood that maybe he was fighting for her too. Silence in the conference room was absolute. Each board member seemed to process Gabriel's words, but Navarro's sharp gaze showed that he wasn't willing to back down so easily. "Nice speech, Vasquez," Navarro said, leaning back in his chair, with a cynical smile. "But we're not here to discuss your personal life. We're here to decide the company's future." Gabriel crossed his arms, his gaze firm. "My personal life and the company are intertwined. Everything I've built was with dedication and purpose, and I will not be taken down by cheap manipulations." Navarro smiled as if he had expected that response. He then threw a document onto the table. "Manipulation? Call it what you want, but numbers don't lie. Here are the financial reports from the past few months. A drop in investments, stalled projects. You've lost control, and everyone here knows it." Camilla felt the tension in the air rise. Gabriel grabbed the document and read through it quickly, his expression unreadable. But instead of showing despair, he smiled. Do you really think I didn't know you'd try something like this, Navarro? He asked, tossing another document onto the table. Here are the real reports. The numbers were manipulated to look negative, but the reality is quite different. My investments remain strong, and the new projects are moving forward. Everything was distorted to fit your narrative, the board members murmured among themselves. Navarro frowned, clearly caught off guard. That's impossible, he muttered. What's impossible is you thinking I wouldn't have a backup plan, Gabriel countered. And if there's still any doubt, I'll let the facts speak for themselves. He then turned to Camilla and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but full of meaning. Camilla represents a new beginning, not just for me, but for everything I'm building. And if you want a leader who understands the true value of a company, then there's no doubt I am that leader. A brief silence filled the room before one of the board members cleared his throat. I believe we have enough information, he said. Let's proceed with the vote. Camilla's heart pounded as she watched each board member cast their vote. Gabriel remained composed, but she knew that inside he was just as anxious as she was. After what felt like an eternity, the chairman of the board spoke. By majority decision, Gabriel Vasquez will remain as CEO of Vasquez Corporation. Relief flooded the room. Navarro's expression darkened as he stormed out without a word. Gabriel, on the other hand, turned to Camilla, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name yet. Thank you for being here, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Camilla knew something had changed between them, and maybe, after that day, nothing would ever be the same. The hallway was silent as Gabriel and Camilla left the boardroom. The tension was finally fading, but a whirlwind of emotions swirled between them. Gabriel had won the battle, but what weighed on his mind the most wasn't the company. It was her. Camilla felt the gentle pressure of his hand around hers. For months, she had tried to convince herself that this was just an agreement, a cold and calculated contract. But in that moment, looking at Gabriel, she realized there was something much bigger between them. Something beyond any signed clause. You don't really need me anymore, she said, trying to keep the emotion out of her voice. The contract is coming to an end. Gabriel held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes filled with emotions he had never dared to show before. I never needed a contract to want you in my life, Camilla, he said, his voice firm but tender. At first, I tried to convince myself that all of this was just business. But every day with you, every conversation, every smile, I got lost in you without even realizing it. And now, the only thing that scares me is imagining my life without you. Camilla's heart pounded. The cold, calculating man she had met had given way to someone vulnerable, someone willing to let go of control for what truly mattered. I don't know how this happened, she admitted, holding back tears. But I don't want it to end either. Gabriel smiled, stepping even closer. Slowly, he raised his hand and placed it gently on her face, as if he wanted to memorize that moment forever. Then let's not let it end, he whispered. And before doubt could creep in between them, Gabriel leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss unlike any they had shared before. There was no contract, no obligation, only desire, surrender, and a silent promise that this was real. When they pulled apart, Camilla let out a soft laugh, resting her forehead against his. I think this changes everything, she said. It only confirms what I already knew, Gabriel replied, holding her tighter. The contract may have brought us together, but love is what kept us here. That night, Gabriel took Camilla out for a special dinner, a quiet, candlelit restaurant where, for the first time, they could be together without the shadow of an agreement between them. Gabriel's gaze was intense, full of unspoken promises. Camilla, in turn, felt free, as if what had once been an obligation had now become a genuine desire. I want to know everything about you, Camilla, he said, intertwining his fingers with hers. Not as the woman who carried my child, but as the woman I want by my side." She smiled, touched by his sincerity. "Then I guess we have plenty of time for that," she whispered, looking at him warmly. The months that followed were intense. Gabriel proved to be a devoted and present father, completely involved with the baby. Camilla, on the other hand, found herself falling in love with a new version of him, more human, more loving. The love that had been born from a contract had transformed into something real, solid, and unbreakable. Until one day, on a peaceful afternoon, Gabriel surprised her. They were in the garden of the mansion, playing with the baby, when he knelt in front of her holding a small velvet blue box. "Camilla, you came into my life in an unexpected way. At first, everything seemed like just a contract, but it turned into something so much bigger. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Will you marry me?" Tears rolled down Camilla's face, her heart racing. She looked at him, then at the baby, and knew there was only one possible answer. "Yes, Gabriel, I want to marry you." He smiled before kissing her passionately under the sky, painted in shades of orange by the setting sun. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new story, not one written by chance or by a contract, but by true love.